Welcome back to Ray's Talk Show. This is your host, Ray Collazo. Thank you so much for joining us. Hold on. I'm flabbergasted because when we're doing the prep for the show with my host, Elbert Garcia. How you doing, LB, by the way? Say hello to the peoples here.
I'm good. Just, looking forward to another Memorial Day weekend.
No, there's no question about it. And we hope everyone enjoys their Memorial Day weekend, of course. And let's never forget the men and women who have paid the ultimate sacrifice for our country, which is the whole purpose. It's not just about barbecues and trying to get in some warm water and cool off. It's really about honoring the people of our military and, of course, most distinctly, the people who have paid the ultimate sacrifice for our country. So much respect to our veterans and our family of veterans and those that have lost their lives serving our great nation. And you're listening to Ray's Talk Show. We talk about what's happening in politics and everything impacting our world from the perspectives of the streets, from the communities that people like me and Elbert came from. So we hope you appreciate our slice, our perspective. You can check out Ray's Talk Show anywhere you can download a podcast. Just check out Ray's Latino Talk Podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, anywhere you can download a show. And of course, you can check out all of our content at rayspodcast.com, on Twitter at Ray's Podcast, on IG at Ray's Latino Talk. And I want people to take down this email because at the end of the show, I'm going to be giving out some prize. Elbert, I have a calendar filling up here this summer. Opportunities for people to hobnob with me and some very people in this work. So I hope people, Elbert, I hope people take down this email, podcastraise@gmail.com. That's podcastraise@gmail.com. LB, at the end of the show, these events are so cool. You're going to want to sign up to be part of one of these activities.
Look at that. This total surprise. Even kept me in to talk about it.
Oh, yes. From coast to coast, we're going to be some activities coming up. But you got to listen to the whole show to check that out. Elbert, let people know where they can find you on social media.
You can find me at Elbert Garcia FL. Elbert Garcia FL. That's either on Twitter or on Facebook. Definitely loop in, but the best place, Ray, as I've always said, is the best place to find me, and my thoughts are here. Podcast.
That's right, and and of course, we have to again thank one of the primary sponsor for this show, Planned Parenthood. They you must text TALK to 22422 and join their hashtag #IDefy campaign. They are really not only. We need to support Planned Parenthood, but they're still on the cutting edge of supporting all of us as it relates to pushing back on discrimination and hate in all of its forms. Be part of their #IDefy campaign by texting TALK to 22422. And Planned Parenthood, as I've said many times on the show, was the first place that gave my mother an opportunity when she came from Puerto Rico as a newbie to the mainland United States. So we just one small example of the kind of dedication they've had, not just to women and providing healthcare access to women across the country, but in particular in the Latina community, coast to coast. There's so many communities where Planned Parenthood is an oasis for these women around the country, whether they're immigrant, single mothers, scared about the choices they need to make in their lives, and are just looking for an opportunity to find someone that'll provide them quality information and quality health care. So definitely support Planned Parenthood. Push back on these attempts to defund the good work that they do. Again, text TALK to 22422. Elbert, as we were prepping for the show, first of all, we're just in a daze because there's so much to talk about. But second of all, it all seemed to come back to this theme. What's up with your peoples? Going off our segment. So I almost feel like this whole episode is going to be what's up with your peoples. Let's start with the hottest thing in the news, which is in the wee hours last night on the East Coast, Republican congressional candidate Greg Gianforte, despite, as LL once said, Mama said knock you out, had a Joe Frazier flashback, as my dad would say, knocking out a reporter in the final moments of his election, pulled out the election. Now, it's not as crazy as it sounds in that approximately 2/3 of the people voted early through mail ballots. So yesterday's voting was really indicative of the entire electorate. But my question to you, Elbert, is, what this means for politics is one thing, but the bigger question is, I think about an elected official thinking it's okay to beat up a reporter in this political climate. And then I turn to the headlines. You can't be a Latino on Facebook and not see read about a horrific incident happening to a Hispanic around the country. If people saw this story, Isabella De Simone, Lisbeth Villanueva, an honors middle school student outside living in the Houston, Texas area, as part of a gag 8th grade ceremony, her teachers give her the most likely to become a terrorist award. That's not funny. I think about this man, this Honduran immigrant down the road from you in Key West the other day, Elbert Antonio Huete, who gets hit as a bicyclist, gets hit by a car. And the first thing the Key West police officer says isn't, "Are you okay? Let's get you medical attention." It's, "Are you illegal? Are you a citizen? Do you have ID?" So this increased, whether it's immigrants, Latinos, people of color, poor people. Think about this budget attack on poor people. The press, Elbert, the larger societal implications of this administration are going well beyond politics.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think a couple of things. I think in terms of the unfortunate incident in Key West, not only was the police officer, basically going against what the rules of the Key West Police Department, right? Like, again, I think sometimes we fail. I think people want to say like, oh, there aren't these rogue cops who are going out there, but like, whether it's rogue or whether it's misunderstanding. I mean, I saw a piece that said today that his actions was actually against the code that the Key West Police Department had actually established, right? Because what ends up happening to this young man, not only this man, because of this officer's actions, doesn't get the medical attention, right, that he quickly deserves, but then he actually eventually gets detained by Border Patrol, right? And he's actually slated for deportation. Right? He gets placed in detention and gets placed in deportation. So, again, this is a guy that wasn't doing anything wrong, and in fact was actually victimized and harmed, right? And so what message does that send out to the community about who the officers in that jurisdiction are actually serving, right? I mean, nothing to the degree in which, in terms of this woman the woman who hit this man, again, there's no discussion about whether or not she was at fault, whether or not this guy deserves anything, whether or not if there's any medical bills that she should be paying or something like this from a moral, ethical standpoint. Here you have somebody like, why would now, the undocumented in that community want to actually deal with the police?
Why would a bicyclist want to deal with the police? A bicyclist. Why would a bicyclist want to deal with the police? I mean, and by the way, he got a $75 fine because they determined he was at fault.
And we don't even know, and again, to the degree that we don't even know whether or not even though that's even, I mean, if the officer's first reaction is to figure out whether or not this guy is his immigration status, can we really talk about the judgment that this officer is getting either on terms of the accident there? But I think in terms of your larger point, and to that teacher, in terms of in Texas, like, what what joke book are you reading from in which you think that's funny, right?
And by the way, it was the day after the Manchester tragedy, the day after, which targeted young people that age.
I think what this tells us is that, and again, Ray, I think, when we were growing up a generation ago, that's not to say that there wasn't issues of microaggression, racism, and all that kind of other stuff, because those things have consistently existed, right? But this is a time now where your mere identification with your Latino identity, regardless of whether you do it in an active way, is just another way of being seen as criminal or criminalized, right? To call a young girl who's in 8th grade a potential terrorist, or most likely become a terrorist. What does that say about how that teacher views that student?
An honor student. This is how she treats the honor students. So imagine the kids that have special needs. Imagine the kids that need help. Imagine the EL students, the kids that need additional support for English proficiency. It's very, very telling comment.
No, it's a hell of a comment. I think the other thing too is that we have almost sanctioned this idea of the limited pie, right? And it's in some ways it's almost like, again, people, a lot of times people should get in trouble because they speak out of both sides of their mouth, right? Because at one point people say, oh yes, we want growth in the economy, we want to be positive, we want to, but it's only for a certain group of folks, right? Because again, there's this idea that, you know, we've got a limited pie and we've got to you somehow have to have some sort of either moral or some sort of reason for getting your slice, you know, of, you know, the American pie, the American dream, or whatever you want to call it in terms of what being here in terms of this America is. And you're increasingly seeing people from the healthcare debate when people said, well, you know, if you've got a pre-existing condition, then somehow something must be wrong with your life, right? I mean, we have people actually saying that, right? And because you actually have people actually believing that, right? And so I think part of it is the real disconnect, right? And I don't, you know, there's a real disconnect in the time that we're living here between all these kind of things. And I, you know, I think even us people on progressives or folks on the left or well-meaning people have contributed to that in some way, right? Also as well. Or more importantly, I think part of that solution has to also involve us looking at each ourselves and figuring out how do we stop that disconnect, right? What are we doing to actually bridge that disconnect? Now, there are just some effed up people in the world who are just going to believe some of those kind of things, right? I think that's the case, right? But there's also, I think there is this notion that people almost take for granted. That is to say, like, well, you know, again, this myth, for example, around food stamps, about to say, like, well, you're just receiving food stamps and you should go out to work. The percentages say there's an extremely significant percentage of people who get food stamps, you know, who first of all get food stamps for their kids, right? Because food stamps are primarily aimed at providing for healthy kids, right? And so there's no reason why in the richest country in the world that any child should go hungry. I want any conservative, anybody who can tell me otherwise, right? Because I think most people believe that, right? And food stamps are supposed to be able to provide for that, right? And so, you know, really it's just a kind of bait and switch that people kind of want to throw around and use words, but that actually really doing it. And I think this is most notably, you know, kind of shown with this back and forth that was online, that was going on between Bernie Sanders and the OMB director, you know, Mick Mulvaney, to which, you know, Sanders is consistently asking him, why does a rich family like Walmart deserve a $52 billion tax break as opposed to, like, poor folks? And again, the OMB director kind of laying the blame on these poor folks who aren't taxpayers, right? When the reality is that those poor folks are taxpayers. There are a lot of people who work minimum wage, working poverty wages in this country, and still pay taxes. Now, their tax return, they might get something back on their tax return, but they're still paying taxes on the stuff that they buy in the grocery store, on the things that they're buying in Walmart and Kmart and all those stores. They're still paying taxes.
And the biggest reason,
it's just, you know, like is not recognizing the reality of the world that we live in.
That's right. And the biggest reason that those working poor people have to apply for food stamps to just have enough for the basic necessities is because we have a minimum wage that is 30 years, hasn't been renewed in decades in a significant way. And that if we were paying people a living wage, $15, and we do in some city, those folks wouldn't most likely need to apply for those kind of benefits, or much less so. And so, you know, you said something a moment ago, I'll be bait and switch, which I think is very relevant to this conversation, because in this idea that we're fighting for a limited pot of the pie, that was a big part of President Trump's messaging, right? Basically to the proverbial white working class person, that this economy, and, you know, they may feel this economy and this culture has forgotten about this idea that, you know, his selling point wasn't austerity, it wasn't fiscal responsibility, it was, you know, you're not getting yours, and these people are getting what you deserve. These Latinos, these minorities, these welfare queens, these illegals, they're, you know, all these lies, you know, they're getting these benefits they don't deserve, they're not eligible for, they're crossing the border, they're committing crimes, they're hurting you, they're hurting us, they're you know, they're getting these things, and you should be getting these things. So with the concept of not fiscal conservatism, but this idea of I believe in benefits, but for me, they support this man and these hopes. Now, the budget that just got released this week the healthcare proposal that was passed in the House. We're going to talk about that in a second in more depth. What actually shows what the answer is, which is these people, the president, particularly the Mick Mulvaney Heritage Foundation wing of the party, don't care about any of us. Don't care about any of us because of our class and maybe because of our race and where we're from. And so that's the bait and switch. The saddest part of it is that this anger that's being expressed to and put upon people of color, immigrants, the press of all things, journalists, is so misguided. And when we should be working together, because as you said, Elbert, there's plenty for everybody. I mean, this country we spend $535 billion on our military. Not that our military is not important, we should support it, but, a bomb here, a helicopter there could pay for some of these entire programs that they're looking to cut. So, I mean, lie heap? You want people to freeze to death? I mean, these people are ridiculous.
No, and I think the other thing that I think also gets lost in that is that, again, with this congressman's behavior or with the sanctioned behavior of the Turkish prime minister, the Turkish president came and the scuffle that happened outside of the embassy there, and in essence,
you talk about real thug life.
It's almost the acceptance of also of violence in a certain to a certain group, right? Because and that acceptance of violence, and again, acceptance of violence, and then detention of those who might also speak out against you, right? I mean, we're seeing increasingly, right-wing supported local laws that are being pushed on the state level that would basically sanction the arrests of people who protest, or even people. I read somewhere into the Minnesota that what was moving forward was a law that would basically okay it if a civilian were to drive through a bunch of protesters who were blocking a highway or a street, right? That would be sanctioned behavior, and if that person got hit, that person wouldn't be allowed to sue. That's just, again, it's stuff that is just like it's
not America. That's the bottom line. It's not America.
Protest, and it's not America, and it's not that kind of stuff there.
That's
so,
right.
I mean, it's crazy to believe that we're living in this way. But to a certain degree, that's what Trump's election has opened. Those are the gates. That's right. The slippery slope that he's opened. Because the truth is that when you speak in a hateful and vile way, the connection to actually then condoning behavior that supports that language isn't too far of a step, right? Isn't too far of a step. And the truth of the matter is that there's not enough police, law enforcement, systems in place to actually make sure that people do the right thing all the time. The truth is that people have to do it by themselves, right? And so, if you allow the worst elements of our society to get away with some of this behavior, then people are going to be like, well, forget it. Like, I can do that too, right? Whether it's not apologizing for obvious mistakes, or just like body slamming. Now, to be fair to the folks, to law enforcement in Montana, they did charge.
Oh, yeah. They weren't the issue. That's absolutely right.
He's got a court hearing on June 4th.
That's right. Yeah, no, law enforcement did their job there.
But
and by the way, the Latina Fox anchor reporter did her job by telling the truth and reporting it. Alicia Acuna, much respect.
Yeah, I mean, props to Fox News and that Fox News crew who saw it and who were like, no, like, we can't stand for that, right? I mean, props to them, for doing that, right? The truth is that there are a lot of folks, conservative economists and things like that, who are saying, hey, this Trump budget doesn't do anything to decrease the deficit and to actually grow the economy in the ways that we know it, right? I mean, there are folks on the right. There are folks on the right who are saying, look, if you're going to give tax breaks to businesses, do it in targeted ways. Do it for equipment. Do it for employment. I mean, this is to say that there is a middle road if you want to use tax reform or taxing to encourage, whether it's social behavior or economic growth. There is a right way to do it. It's just so blatantly obvious that the way that this administration has decided to do it is wrong, immoral, and inhumane. And what I started to hear today when you start to look at all the talking heads is people saying, well, that budget really wasn't supposed to work. It's supposed to be a statement. It's supposed to be a fulfillment of campaign promises. It's supposed to be all this kind of stuff. And the truth of the matter is that that's BS. I mean, and if that's the case, if that's a totally political environment, then again, this president has once again failed the American people by not doing his job. His job as the head of the executive branch of the government is to propose a budget in which, when it comes to negotiations with the legislative staff, to at least begin the process, right? And so in many ways, one could argue that, he's trying to negotiate from his point of view of the most extreme and trying to get somewhere in the middle, right? But his most extreme is inhumane, and it doesn't do anything but just reward cronyism and corruption of the people who are loyal to him. And
Now,
that may work, in another country, an authoritarian country, but that's not the way America is supposed to work.
well, no, and even from a political perspective, he just blatantly lied to the people that supported him. I mean, those cuts hurt his, arguably, if they were fully enacted, his core supporters the most. So we have to be diligent to deal with the budget, and we'll talk about that more in a second. I did want to get to the CBO Score. That's not a sports. That's not something you're going to see on the ESPN tracker. But indeed, this week, the Congressional Budget Office, which, unlike other branches of the government or other governmental departments, is run by basically nonpartisan economists. So the Congressional Budget Office takes proposed bills, legislation. They analyze it, and then they come up with a budget score, which basically reveals their best analysis as to what would be the budgetary hit and the real sort of data hit impact of different bills. So the previous House version of the House bill that wasn't voted on about a month ago had been projected, the CBO projected only 24 million people would lose health care. And so, give or take, and after the fixes, the adjustments that were done, that were supposed to rectify some of the issues with the bill, the CBO score, which was released after they voted on it in the House, by the way, let's not forget, has now announced that 23 million people would lose their health care. Speaker Ryan saying, hey, look, it proves the premiums go down. But once you look into the numbers, you realize that, of course, premiums will go down because all the sick people will get kicked off health care. So, of course, if only young, healthy people have health care, then, it stands to say that maybe that those people's, the people that have cheaper insurance anyway would remain. To give one example of the impact of this, a 64-year-old that makes $24,000 a year currently pays about $1,700 worth of health insurance for the health insurance premiums for the year. If this bill were to be enacted, that number would go up to at least $13,000. So over half of their income would go to health insurance. So of course they wouldn't be able to afford their insurance. This now is in the Senate. Again, Senators Heller and Flake, from a Latino perspective, are the two senators we need to focus on the most because they are up for election next year, and we have an electorate that has great influence on those races. There's senators and members of Congress all over the country we have to continue to message to, because at some point the House is going to take this back up. Elbert, I know it's a hot topic in Florida. What are your any quick thoughts on the CBO score and why people should take this seriously? Because look, even if it's wrong by 30%, 40%, 50%, it's clear that millions of people, if not tens of millions of people, would lose their health care.
I think this is the thing about healthcare. Someone mentioned about healthcare. In some ways, it is like car insurance. Like when you pay your car insurance, you really don't think about what it covers or what it gets you until you are sick, right? Until you are something like that, right? But the other thing is that having gotten used to what, the AHCA was able to provide, people are like, Americans don't like stuff getting taken away from them. And I personally think that as you get further out, I'm sorry about that. As you get further out, and away from Obama, I think you have the general electorate, even those who might have not particularly liked the ACA because of the Democratic president, I think they begin to look at it and they begin to say, what the hell are these people doing? What the hell are these people trying to give or not give? I think that's the thing, So
no, and it's
I think you're having situations where Cabello and some of these other folks, they're gonna have to. They don't want to talk about it now, and they can afford to run away from it now. But they're gonna have to deal with the situation, and they're gonna have to deal with the right situation. Because now Cabello comes back in the House and says, "Well, I was told basically that it's gonna get fixed in the Senate, right?" And to which whether or not it's good enough for the people in his district, we'll kind of see. But there's no doubt that when you add what is trying to be done on the healthcare side plus the budget side, it's clear as to what the party, the Republican Party that is, what they're trying to do. And they're really just trying to basically have people fend for themselves. Right? That's what they want to do. And the problem is that in fending for themselves and in government stepping out of the way, then what they're doing is that they're letting the market and in essence the greed of the market basically push people under, right? And I think that's what I think people are starting to kind of recognize and realize. Now, no one understands healthcare. No one no one understands why the hell does it have to go up every year? Why the hell can't we begin to fix it, right? So no one really understands this, but I think people understand when people say, oh, it's going to cost a lot. And I think the problem is that people are like, well, it's rising. Obama promised that it wouldn't rise, when the truth of the matter is that everyone expected healthcare to rise. It's a question of how much it's going to cost every year, right? And so now people are saying, well, shoot, the Republicans don't have an even better deal. In fact, I'm getting screwed even worse. And I think people are almost ready to just call all elected officials on the table and say, look, fix this thing once and for all. And to me, what it potentially leads into a discussion, and it'll be interesting to see next year how this does. Do we need to not just re-examine the whole idea of what government does to curtail costs, and does that mean renewed life for this idea of a single payer system? That at least provides a minimal level of healthcare coverage for folks, and that allows people to have some sort of security in the stuff that they do. Because I think people are realizing that, this is not, this has a real effect on people's real lives.
That's right. And you're listening to Elbert Garcia on Raise Latino Talk podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Wanted to note here quickly, Elbert, we have another sponsor today. Really excited. This is one that's close to our hearts here. If you're in the Philadelphia area, if you're in the Northeast Corridor, you've got to check out the upcoming Philadelphia Latino Film, Elbert.
Look at that.
Coming up June 2nd to the 4th, featuring films from all over the United States, Puerto Rico, Venezuela, Cuba, Central America, including Residentes documentary documenting his journey in the creation of his latest album. So it's going to be a really exciting film festival. Marangeli Mejia Rabel, a good friend of ours, and Cecilia Huesca, and our friends at the Philadelphia Latino Film Festival. For more information for tickets, go to phlaff.org/tickets. It's phlaff.org/tickets. Support the Philadelphia Latino Film Festival, June 2nd and 4th. A real great lineup there, Elbert. I know you'll be checking out that lineup there.
Shout out to the energy that's coming out of Philly. I think in general, where they're talking about creative energy or political energy, there's a lot of energy coming out of that part of the country.
We're trying, dog. We're trying.
Thank you. Kind of waking up and realizing their own power.
Thank you for the shout out. Let's talk about what's up with our Department of Education Secretary Betsy DeVos, Elbert. Recently, at a committee hearing to discuss trying to justify billions of dollars being cut out of her budget. There's just so many things. She, props to Congresswoman Catherine Clark from Massachusetts that asked her a very simple question and said, essentially, if a school applying for voucher money or any federal monies, if a private school or a parochial school had any discriminatory admissions policies related to sexuality, race, disability? Would the Department of Education on a federal level intervene to deny access to federal funds to that school if the state was cool with it, or if the state allowed it, for hypothetically? And she could not affirmatively say yes. She basically ducked the question. So essentially, she's saying that the current Department of Education will not advocate for student civil rights.
That just blows your mind. It blows your mind because most educators and teachers don't care at the end of the day who their kids are. Right? Now, you could argue that they should care a little bit about who their kids are in terms of like being culturally competent and doing all those things are, but even folks who are just insensitive in that way have a general basic belief that all kids should have a right to learn, regardless of who they are. Right? And again, I think it's about eroding the basic standards. Like, where have we gone to this country where, like, you can't have the director of the Department of Education, the Federal Department of Education, say that? Like, that's like a basic qualification that you should have. That your job is to freaking uphold the law. Right? Just uphold the law and the previous standards of what your department has done. You know, like, And to me, what that does is that it reveals, especially in certain areas, the mass discrimination and segregation that in some places charter schools are playing. Right? Now, in some places, I think charter schools are unnecessary. You know, like, I mean, that's a complicated issue, but like, I do think in some places,
that's a whole conversation, because there's, and for people that aren't familiar with that, really quickly, over people that approve that issue from a Latino perspective, first of all, Latinos generally around the country like the idea of choice, and that's a loaded conversation about what that means in terms of charter schools and even, federal monies. So the Latino leadership class at times, and the Latino, families day to day, there's some interesting conversations there, but there's a big difference between what we consider community charter schools, which organically come out of many times in our communities, Latino community-based organizations as offshoots, and sort of the corporate charter school complex, which has become a very lucrative business. And that's a very loaded conversation, but we don't have time for it now. But you're right. I mean, it's something that
wherever you stand on that issue, the truth of the matter is that, you know, that's not the issue, right? The issue isn't like whether or not you support charter schools. Now, the real question is like, will you allow a group of folks, an institution, in essence, discriminate against another group of people? Whether that group is a church, a school, a government office, whatever. Like, there's just some basic principles there, and it is sad that a woman who, in essence, a person, right, that is in charge of setting the educational standards for the country, is basically allowed to basically say, well, if the state thinks it's okay, well, it's okay. No, that's not how we, that's not how we face discrimination. That's not how we deal with one another. Right? There's some basic standards in terms of that.
That's right. We have to be diligent on this. There's no question about it. I want to quickly, Elbert, and that relates to the budget too, because the thing I do want to say, and earlier this week, if you check out Raise Latino Talk podcast, earlier this week, I really took a deeper dive into this budget, into the dangers that this budget impacts our community. So if you want to definitely download that episode earlier this week. The one thing I will say quickly on the budget is that one of the things you're going to hear in the media is this concept of, well, this budget is dead on arrival. This budget is really never going to be enacted. And so the reality is that this budget really is a marker for negotiation. And one of the things that's going to happen here is that if we're not very diligent, what will happen is that cuts will take place in this budget that disproportionately and overwhelmingly impact our community. So, for example, if they keep Meals on Wheels or Medicare or others that primarily service older people in this country who are primarily overwhelmingly white, but cut services geared towards younger people, particularly younger, lower, poorer younger people, like SNAP, like Head Start, like TRIO programs, like GEAR Up programs. I mean, these are programs that are the reason me and Elbert got to go to college in the first place. Those programs disproportionately and sometimes overwhelmingly support Latinos. I didn't realize it. 40% of Head Start kids, 33% of TRIO kids, 40% of GEAR Up kids are Latino across the country. So as we delve into this budget debate, this war, this budget battle, understand that there's stuff on the table that's going to be negotiated in and negotiated out. And we have to be diligent to make sure that things like the child tax credit for I-10 filers and these programs that like LIHEAP that impact our community disproportionately are in the fight, because at the end of the day, they may walk away with deals that they can go back to their older white constituents and say, look, I protected you, but we're the ones getting left behind.
No, and we have to also, again, and I go back to this thing, is like, all of us who did go to a Head Start program, and some of us may not even know that the programs we went to were funded by like government stuff or nonprofit stuff. And
That's right.
So,
That's right.
So check yourself, ask your parents. But I think it is time for us who have created a life, that is, just who have a life, just be able to say, no, I can say, look, you know what? My parents were on welfare, right? We were able to use that to I remember going, doing food stamps until I was 15 or 16 years old, right? Like and you know what? It helped us, right? I think, whether it's in the small ways and macro ways or in micro ways, we need to push back and support the idea of the safety net. Right, and I think what would this country be? I think again, it's how you relate numbers. People will say, well, the numbers of people who are utilizing the safety net over the last 8 years are in record numbers. Well, shit, what would have happened to all those people if the safety net wasn't there? Right? Would we have gotten into a worse depression? We saw it in the depression when there wasn't a safety net.
You think it would be safer? You think that would help with crime? All these people worried about crime and blacks and Latinos attacking them. You think that would make you safer? Cutting these programs?
Like,
I was a WIC baby. I ain't gonna lie. I drank WIC milk when I was a kid. Hey.
That's what I'm saying. Like
keep it real.
The reason why we've been able, even to get 1.6% growth, right, is in some ways because people have been, there is a safety net that caught them. Now there's too many people that fall through, but just again, it's like we live in an age sometimes where it's hard to quantify when things actually work. Right? So, people will get sometimes mad at Obama about, oh, he didn't do X, Y, and Z, but it's like, he saved the auto industry. Right? We don't have to think about it. He saved it. He literally saved the auto industry.
That's right. That's right.
And we can't imagine a country, without Detroit selling cars, but that's what you would have had.
That's right. That's right.
And so it's hard for him to take credit, or any person to take credit when you save something, when you save a job, as opposed to when you don't lose it. And so that's a hard thing, especially in these days of social media and impact and images and stuff like that. It's hard for voters to actually quantify that, right? Unless you actually are so close that you actually can see it. But that's the truth, right? And the worst thing about all this situation is that if we do manage to save all these programs, there will be a certain segment of the population that will say and feel, oh, well, it was never really going to happen, so don't worry about it, right? And it's just like, you can't risk that. You can't risk that. We already see in one way by the result of the 2016 election of what happens when people say, it's okay, they're both the same. Right?
I don't know who's saying that now. I mean, that's
or the market to know what's going to happen next.
Let me read Elbert, our great friend David Love, who's a very prominent political journalist. The first paragraph of his latest column this week in the Grio. Are we witnessing the new Clarence Thomas? Thomas did a shocking thing when he voted with the majority of his Supreme Court colleagues this week to strike down 2 racially gerrymandered congressional districts in North Carolina. If the new Clarence Thomas wants to stick around for a while, we're not mad at him. Very much respect to David Love. Clarence Thomas did the right thing. Gerrymandering, redistricting is a big issue that really has diluted Democratic voter strength, and particularly minority voting strength. And what this speaks to, and again, we'll have other voting rights experts and legal experts to get into this more, but this Cooper Harris case in North Carolina really spoke to the fact that two congressional districts were drawn specifically to dilute black voting power by packing black voters into a couple districts so that they couldn't, the black community's voting power was diluted by it being concentrated in so few districts. It's a very interesting conversation. We'll continue to have it, but I wanted to make sure we gave David Love, our great friend, and Clarence Thomas a little props. We had a good week in the court this week. Elbert, the appeals court, now the federal appeals court refused Thursday to reinstate President Trump's revised travel ban, saying it, quote, drips with religious intolerance, animus, and discrimination. And that was the court in Richmond, Virginia. It wasn't the Hawaii court or the super liberal San Francisco court. So at least the court system, Elbert, is showing some spine. And, we've got these institutions for a reason.
Yeah, I mean, we have the institutions. And I think, when people say sometimes, like, too many people are going to law school, I always kind of push back on that and say, well, not enough of us who need to be there are going there, right? So I think it's all about, I think it's about investment. I think it's about, like, the folks who are leading the charge in the legal world, and again, the diversity of those charges and those folks, come about from some of the local work that's being done. So I think a lot of props to our legal staff. A lot of props to just people in terms of looking at situations and understanding and holding the line, And again, I think sometimes it's very easy to get caught up in this paradigm of left, right, conservative, liberal, and those kind of things there. I mean, it's real easy to do it, and there's certainly reasons for it. But I do think, Ray, that we are, what President Trump has shown us is an ideology that's actually not really rooted in anything whatsoever except himself, right? Because when you look at it in terms of conservative principles or principles of libertarian principles or or principles of just like basic economic growth and freedom and justice and stuff like that, a lot of those things just don't hold weight, right? They don't stand up to the critical eye of those things, right? Because ultimately, the role of whether it's the market or government or anything else is to provide certain things, is to do certain things. And no matter how you cut the math, the administration, Trump's administration and policies just don't do it. And part of it is that, I think it goes back to Steve Bannon's real mission, which is to basically discredit, not just the government, but just collective action, right? And I think, if after 4 years, you have a bunch of dysfunctional government agencies, I think the Steve Bannons of the world would be very, very happy, because that means that it provides a lane for people to do whatever they want and not really get any accountability towards it.
I got a tip for your man, Elbert, DNC Chairman Tom Perez. He got a letter recently from a group of very powerful, very significant black women activists and community leaders that are saying there's too much at stake to ignore black women, have a meeting with him because they feel the DNC needs to concentrate more of its support to black women around the country. They cite the fact that more and more black women are running successfully for public office as Democrats, but are not getting the financial or the political support that they deserve. Prominent African-American women like our friend L. Joy Williams, Representative Yvette Clarke from BK, and even Star Jones was on this list of dignitaries. So I just want to let your man know, Elbert, that he needs to open up his Google Calendar and make sure he can squeeze these ladies in as soon as possible, because there is indeed, that is a phrase you can't repeat enough, there's too much at stake to ignore black women.
Yeah, I think that the letter, I think, speaks for itself. Look, what is so hard is that at this time of grassroots pushback against the worst of parts of the Trump agenda, is you have a Democratic Party that in of itself is going through a transition and doesn't even know what or how to do things. And part of it is, I think, envisioning an America that a lot of people have trouble with, but is the demographic reality.
That's right.
Which is that people of color, we have to get used to a world where people of color are not just at the head of the table, but they are actually leading the charge.
Amen, brother.
And
Amen.
And I think that most people on the ground can understand that, but I think, from a societal vision level, it's hard. It's hard to conceive, even looking at a situation where you don't see, or when you don't see a white male in a prominent position with folks of color doing it.
Yeah, we have to. It's a bigger conversation, Elbert, because I find the plight of how society treats black women so fascinating. Because on one hand, we have in this society like these black deities. You know what I mean? Like, I think about how society elevates and honors Oprah, Beyonce, Michelle Obama, Serena Williams, and then at the same time, the Kerry Washington character on Scandal, but then at the same time, it's like you said, we have this phobia, this problem with accepting, particularly black women, for their intellectual prowess, in sort of these day-to-day leadership positions. And just honoring even poorer people, and people of color, and just honoring their dignity in wherever they're at. So, and thinking about the seniors that I met with the other day, just the fact that they just wanted, a very, a social program in the federal budget that's a tiny little slice, gives millions of people, of these seniors around the country, dignity. And so what's wrong with that? So yeah, definitely, Tom, take that meeting really quickly as we wrap this up. Again, we want to thank Planned Parenthood. Text TALK to 22422 to join their Defy campaign. We have to stop hate and discrimination in all of its forms, particularly though that directed at the healthcare of women. Ridiculous. And Elbert, I want to let people know that if they want to hang with me, I got a couple opportunities. And this is how I'm going to do this. If you're the first one to email me at podcastraise@gmail.com, that's podcastraise@gmail.com. I've got one ticket, one opportunity for the first person who emails me for 3 different events that I'm going to be a part of, LB, really quickly. If you want to think about this one, LB. If you live in the New York, North Jersey area, you could have lunch with me and Senators Menendez and Booker on June 19th. Could you imagine having lunch with me, Senator Cory Booker, Senator Bob Menendez, in Brick City, Newark? So if you live in the New York, North Jersey area, hell, if you want to just go to Newark on June 19th and you want to have lunch with us, the 3 amigos, email me at podcastraise@gmail.com, podcastraise@gmail.com. We'll talk politics. We'll talk about the Latino agenda and much, much more. And there's always a lot of good food in Newark. The week of June 26th, if you want to have lunch with me in Queens, New York, with a group of New York Latino leaders, in Corona, Elbert. There's a lot of good food in Corona, dog.
Props to Corona.
Props to Corona. If you want to have lunch with me and a group of Latino leaders in Queens, New York, the week of June 26th, email me at podcastraise@gmail.com. You can't do both, but email me as soon as you can. And I don't just do East Coast, dog. We're going to the Southwest. If you want to join me at a private event, with some great Latino leaders all over the country, but especially, of course, that Southwest flavor in Phoenix, Arizona, LB, on July 7th. If you want to, I've got your hookup. I've got your ticket. Very private, very upscale, it's going to be a great event. Email me at podcastraise@gmail.com if you're going to be in the Phoenix area on the weekend of July 7th. So, Elbert, I'm representing for our squad, giving them opportunities to engage, continue these conversations, and rub elbows with some really good people.
Love it, right? Always a good...
Trying to do it, brother. Props, talk about supporting our leadership. Props to our great friend Dominic Moreno, who just announced, State Senator Moreno, just announced that he'll be running for congressional seat 7 at Perlmutter, a Democrat running for governor next year. My Philly guy, Hickenlooper's term limited. So Dominic Moreno, a great guy. I was just with him at the DNC this summer. The gentleman that had his seat before him, Jesse Libati, is a great friend to the show. A 32-year-old Elbert running for Congress, young Latino, has a great personal story. So we have to support Dominic Moreno. So props. We're all over the place. Colorado, Arizona, Florida, New York. We got you covered here at Raise Latino Talk podcast. Elbert, any final shout outs before we wrap up the show?
Just a shout out, it's Memorial Day weekend, so just remembering not only our folks who served and died in terms of the military, but also just remembering the fact that that a lot of our military folks also came back home and got themselves involved in civically in their communities, led and contributed. Especially our black and brown servicemen and women came back from World War II and Vietnam and stuff,
right.
and went and launched themselves into empowering their communities at home, and those people as well, and those people who lost their lives trying to on the home front, trying to make sure that freedom was delivered, not just secured abroad but also delivered at home. Think of those folks also as well in terms of this Memorial Day weekend. I know we get a lot of props to our military folks, and rightfully and deservingly
Absolutely.
so.
Always.
There's a lot of folks on the home front who make sure that freedom gets delivered and that sacrifice abroad doesn't get hindered at home. And we should also remember those folks too.
Elby, thank you, brother. Enjoy the weekend with the family, and thank you so much for our Raise Latino Talk podcast, Familia. Enjoy your Memorial Day weekend.